Welcome to Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. For this episode, we're joined by two artists who harness the power of words. Windsor's first multicultural community storyteller, TJ Travis, will discuss his new role and share his rhythmic poetry. But first, we'll meet local author Marianne Adam, who has written an historic novel about four women living in the 1850s in Amherstburg. They're from disparate worlds, but share a close bond. And here to tell us more about The Medicine Bag is Marianne Adam. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Veronique. I'm happy to be here.
So, I really enjoyed this story.
Oh, good.
What inspired you to write the book? I mean, this particular story.
Well, I live on the river in Amherstburg, and I was out there one day. I'm an avid gardener. And there was something that was happening. It was one of the 1,000-foot freighters was going by, plus one of the tall ships, and they were going in opposite directions. And I thought, wow, look at this difference in time and changes. And then I thought, geez, I wonder who lived here on this property, 200 years ago. And I started to do some research, and I found that the property that I'm on was the Huron Reserve. And that's what got me started. I just started doing research and who lived there and what Amherstburg was like. Let me go back a little bit. I'm on the Bellevue Conservancy. Bellevue is our National Historic Site. That building is over 200 years old. I love that building. And I thought, I wonder if I could have a story around Bellevue. And that's how it all started. And part of the proceeds from my book go towards the Conservancy, one of the windows.
So tell us a little bit about the background of that building. It really is an extraordinary building.
Oh, we love it. It was built by the Reynolds family, Robert Reynolds and his wife, Marie-Therese, and over 200 years ago. Robert's father was a commissariat over in Detroit. It's hard for us to imagine that there were no borders. So when the War of 1812 looked like it was going to come, he moved to Amherstburg and had a house, I think, on the corner of Richmond Street and Dalhousie. Then his job was then passed on to his son, Robert, and Robert married Marie-Therese, and I can never remember her name. It's quite long, but she was the daughter-in-law of McGill, from McGill University. They named a school after him. And he was a fur trader and a gajillionaire. So when his son died, she inherited money. So it was part of her money that built the home. And if people think of it now, there were two wings that were added on by other owners over the years. Their original building was just a block in the middle, but it was the biggest house in all of Upper Canada. They were very, very wealthy.
And the characters in the book are also, quite interesting.
Yes.
And as I said in the intro, live very disparate lives.
Yes.
Tell us about two of the characters, Catherine Reynolds and Mary Powers.
Okay.
And they're based on historical figures,
yes.
I assume.
Catherine was Robert's sister. There was another sister, Margaret, and they were both very beautiful artists. And neither one of them married, so they lived in the house with Robert and his wife. And I was trying to think, I tried to find some pictures of Catherine. I think I found one, and that's how I could describe her hair and her dress. You've got to remember, I had so much help with research. People were so generous with their time and helped me out with all this research I had to do. I kind of felt sorry for Catherine. She had this wonderful talent, and I would have imagined she wanted to be an architect, and that was what I wrote in the story, because she learned how to do drawings, and I think probably wanted to be an architect, but impossible at the time for her to go into that profession. Mary was from Ireland. She escaped during the potato famine. Now, did they meet each other on the story that, in Montreal? Probably not. But I wrote that in, and they were actually, she and her husband were servants in the home for the Reynolds family. So if you ever, hopefully the building will open up and there'll be tours of it. But if you go into the Pioneer Kitchen, which is on the far south side of the building, there's this tiny little staircase that goes up from the kitchen and goes into this room at the very top of the kitchen. And that's where I envision that Mary and John and their son stayed. It's a beautiful room surrounded by windows and probably the nicest place they would have ever stayed in. Yeah.
What was it like being in that room, especially with you writing?
I felt so much
this
love. There was something about that room that was so comfortable and just, I don't know, I guess because I'm a Scorpio, I sense all these things, but I just felt a lot of love there. And that is the window I've picked out for the proceeds from my book. That's the one I'd like to replace. It's the real small one in the front. Yeah.
And speaking of Catherine's talent,
yes,
the photograph at the back of the book was
that
actually her.
That is her drawing. It actually it's in both the Windsor Art Museum and the Detroit Institute of Art. And the reason that it's hung there, Margaret's work too, is because they really could now depict what life was like in that time. That is the East End, the east part of Bellevue. You'll know that it's very different because there's two extensions. One is probably Robert Honor, who has helped me so much with research. He thinks it was a place where, because it was on so many acres, you would have had to had a building that for repairs and farm equipment repairs. The other one is the Pioneer Kitchen on the left-hand side. You'll notice that they're not attached to the house.
No.
Because the kitchens never were because of a fear of fire.
Right.
Yeah, so they were. So I would imagine that there would be poor Mary cooking these big dinners in this tiny, tiny Pioneer Kitchen and then having to literally schlep them outside in the winter and back into the dining room that would have been at that end of the home.
Now, another character, a very interesting character, is Makeda, who is a Métis.
Yes.
And she has the medicine bag. And really, her character comes to life through her medicine bag.
Yes.
Sort of talk about why a medicine bag.
I guess I've always been fascinated by native medicine. My grandmother, she was not a native, but she graduated from Hotel Dieu in 1920. And I thought, my God, what did they use for medicines? And she used to mix up these poultices and for us. And I thought, that's probably she learned that from her mother and her mother, which would have been based on sort of roots and flowers and bark, because that's all they had. There was no drugstore, there was no doctor. So you took stuff from the land and used it for healing. And then when I found out, I started researching that.
It must have taken a lot of research.
Oh, tons. And the fine biologist at IRCA, I called him up. He gave me information galore, or the botanist, and about medicines and all these things that they would have used 200 years ago to survive. And so then I thought, okay, the medicine bag. I wonder how maybe I could use her medicines from the medicine bag. And then the story just grew. I mean, I'm not that kind of writer that plots it out. I'll be writing down notes. I was at Art by the River, and I was selling my books, and I'm writing notes about the next book I'm writing. So that's how I work. So it's just sort of all fit in how these people met through her medicine bag. And
so Hester had 2 children and had to leave her husband
because he had
behind.
been at another plantation. They had split up because of something was happening with the horses, and Billy D, the bad guy at the beginning, who gets his just desserts.
Yes, no, I love that. And I mean, it's so interesting how they all came together. How did you sort of get her story woven into that?
I think it's because we live on the water and there's so much activity going on there. I try to envision what would happen. Well, first of all, I'd studied a lot about First Nations people, and I could have done more, but they were always on Boblo Island, or Bois Blanc, they are calling it now.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, they would have come over that way. Let's have Makita meet them somehow, because there is a place called Hole in the Wall. It does really exist. And that's where they were coming through. And then I'm thinking, okay, they would have been tired. They would have been scratched from bushes and trees. Let's use her medicine bag, because she always would have had it. And that's how that came up.
And I mean, we won't give away how they got Isaac and Hester together. And Ian, who opens and closes the book, he's an interesting character as well.
That's a whole interesting thing. That was an add-on at the very end of when I had already got it to the editor. And she emailed me and she said, Marianne, I want a preface and an epilogue by the end of the week. I said, what are you talking about? And she said, it has to open with something. So he's based on Scott Weir, who is the architect for the company that redid the roof. And he loves Bellevue. And I thought, how would he write it? And that was in my head. I've never met him.
So 2 very quick questions, because unfortunately we're running out of time. Do you have a favorite character?
I would have to say Mary. She was a tough girl. Again, had to be.
Yes.
She was very tough.
And now you're donating a portion?
Part of my proceeds are going to one of the windows, because what we're doing now, we're fundraising. So if you want to purchase a window, because they would have to be all done by hand. They can't just hire a window company. So I have chosen mine. So the proceeds, part of the proceeds go to that.
And where can people find your book?
Oh, absolutely everywhere.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
At all the local bookstores?
Yeah, absolutely. It's at, first of all, the River Bookshop. It's at Biblioasis in the city. It's at Priscilla's Presence in Harrow, Art and Heirlooms in Chatham, the Storyteller on Ottawa Street, and the Gibson Gallery.
Thank you so much for telling us about it.
Oh, you're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. Our next guest is bringing art and art education to the Windsor community. TJ Travis is the executive director of Windsor's long-standing artist-run gallery, Artside Inc. Besides helping other artists share their craft, TJ has his own stories to tell and poetry to recite. He pairs spoken word with abstract rhythmic sound art. Describing himself as a child of the stars, he's also an Afro-Indigenous descendant who has a deep connection to the area's history of slavery. And if these descriptions weren't enough to intrigue you, recently, TJ was designated Windsor's first multicultural community storyteller. And here to tell us more about his new role and his artistic passions is TJ Travis himself. Welcome back to Scribes and Songsters.
It's really nice to be here. It feels like yesterday.
Yeah, I know, but like 2.5, 3 years just blows by, doesn't it?
It did. It absolutely did.
And you've been so busy in all this time, and congratulations on the achievement of becoming the first Indigenous storyteller. That's really fantastic. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so just to correct the title, it's the multicultural community storyteller. Our dear friend Teresa Sims, she has the position of Indigenous storyteller.
Right.
What the position means to me, especially when I first approached it, I thought the idea was just to leverage the platform to provide space for people to share their stories. And then it occurred to me one day that I'm also a multicultural story, and that the stories that I have are valid as well, and that really opened up the opportunity for me to take a lot of the work that I'd been working on over the years and just really use them to propel a space that could also be leveraged to highlight the stories of so many of our peoples in Windsor-Essex County. So
it has a very broad, sort of wide-ranging experience for you.
Yeah, very, very wide. And since I'm inaugural in the position, I kind of get to write, the position as I go. And I also have the responsibility of creating such a position that can be passed down, so there's also a legacy piece that's built into that. And I'm also mindful of that piece.
Mm-hmm. Now, you study existence, consciousness, and humanity. Why those areas? What is that to you?
For me, it comes back to it's all rooted into identity, and I try to experience life from the eyes of myself as a child and then moving into adolescence and then where I am now so that I don't forget those pieces. And that's especially important as an educator, because I also get the opportunity to go into classrooms and work with children as young as kindergarten all the way into students who are studying at the university level. And I also find it, very, very valuable to make sure that I am identifying the value that's inside people of all ages, so yeah, I think about these sorts of things constantly, but it always roots back to identity, because personally, I feel as somebody who was underestimated by the greater society as a younger person who was growing up of very, very modest means. And, I see a lot of those people today, and I want to make sure that, none of them are left behind in any way, so I'm very mindful to experience the world in all the ways that you had just mentioned.
Do you find that encompassing the study of those things advances your knowledge, the understanding of yourself and the knowledge of what you do?
It's my belief that that we're an extension of our ancestors, so my ancestors were reborn into the avatar that I occupy, so I have those stories that are within me. And the only way for me to rationalize what that is to play with the idea of multi-dimensional existence, so I'm very much intrigued by numbers and science and multi-dimension and the way that we relate to these aspects of existence, and it also informs, maybe the complexity of some of the writing that I currently work on, to challenge myself to not just repeat the same thing. I don't want to be the person who's just constantly talking about their ancestors in the context of slavery and then liberation. I'd also like to think about them as human beings that dreamt at nighttime and had big dreams, and I also like to think about, those ancestors as people who were once children, experiencing the vastness of the sky for the very first time, experiencing rainbows and these sorts of things, and making sure that that's always represented in the work that I'm doing, because every time I write about them, I'm bringing them back to life.
And does focusing on, those areas, the questions of reality and illusion, is that important to have integrated into your work?
Absolutely, because that's where I live, and I want to invite people into that space. It's also a way to open the mind or to broaden the mind and really exercise imagination. When I first stepped into the position at ArtSite, I was stepping into the position during a time of not just pandemic, but also lockdown. My question to the board of directors and the membership is, what is your wildest dreams for this space? Because we are in maybe the darkest time that any of us may ever experience. What kind of rainbows can we paint all over this place? Anything is possible right now, and I live that way every day, so it shows up in my writing. It shows up in the way that I perform or express in any way. And the illusion piece, that's really just to say, we're quite magical, in the way that we can absolutely create something out of nothing. And we've seen it done time and time again.
You're a descendant of people who escaped via the Underground Railroad, and you listened to stories your entire childhood. Did those stories, have they always been an integral part of your life?
Oh, for sure. And growing up as a child, I was getting bits and pieces of those stories. And the story is epic. It's just, it's astonishing. And for me, I wanted to know how true all those stories are, because we grew up with folk tales, and we believe it. We allow our imagination to run wild with it. But the idea that rooted inside so many of those big stories were absolute truths. And I had the ability to bring my person to those landscapes and experience those spaces. Like, I had the opportunity to stand on the land that my oldest known ancestor was enslaved upon and emancipated from.
What did that feel like?
It was bizarre. It was bizarre. I stood in the driveway in the land where that piece of land now is it's a little white house with a very long driveway surrounded by trees. The person living in that house has no idea of the history, but those trees that surround it, they were there for everything. They seen the whole thing. Like, if they could speak, they would be the storytellers, right? So I sat there and just meditated on the idea that, I could lean against a tree that my ancestors leant against hundreds of years ago, and then just listening to the breeze as it kind of moves through the leaves, knowing that, these were the sounds that were covering footprints as people were escaping, one of the most terrible pieces of our human history.
And you traced your family history back to the 1700s, 1745, and Richard Tavis. Tell me about Richard Tavis.
Yeah, so Richard Travis is a person who was born to a mother who was enslaved. And the law at that time was, if you were born to an enslaved mother, you inherit slavery. He was enslaved all the way into his 50s. He didn't self-liberate until he was well into his 50s. And when he did, he left that experience with his wife, who was called Lucinda, and his children. They traveled from Virginia all the way into Pennsylvania. They bought a piece of land, 150 acres of land, for $2, the equivalent of $2 American, and they built a freedom town. And that's their story. That's my story. And I'm like, people should know this story. And since doing that research and having a lot of it published through other media outlets, my family from across North America, they're reaching out to me, and they have other pieces of that story. So it continues on. It continues on. I've taken a lot of the material and I've did what artists do. I've turned it into poetry and stories. And recently, I took many of those poems and I turned them into a one-person show called My Word. But it's never complete. Like, I keep getting more information, and it becomes very difficult to take all of this work and finally publish it, because the re-edits go on and on and on. So I think living on stage and in poetry is the most appropriate place for it.
What an extraordinary man Richard Travis was. And when you think about it, given the times, what an extraordinary achievement. And now we need to hear some of your work. And there's a wonderful piece. You have A Body of Stories. Would you read that?
This is actually a piece that I had written for the announcement of the multicultural community storyteller. So I had the opportunity to share this piece. And like most of my writings, it came to me that morning. So I had the opportunity to read it for the very first time in front of a group of people, and I've not revisited since that time. So it's nice to read it here. A Body of Stories. We carry stories in our bodies. Poems journey through our veins, electrifying our bones with memories that remind us of our ancestors' dreams. Every time we breathe in and breathe out, we travel through measurements of time. Footprints through a forested landscape, guided by the sonata of mother birds, composing and seeds, navigational maps into the bones of their hatchlings. The wind performs a magical score of ancient prayers offered to the sky when the land becomes too dry to release food. We carry these stories in our bones. When I close my eyes, my eyelids whisper secrets of the Underground Railroad my ancestors hid beneath their tongues, and pass throughout our family one generation to the next through recipes that seem to be thrown together haphazardly, but contain the secrets of the stars. And within those constellations, an encyclopedia of existence, I have those poems activating these bones to remind me, wherever I am, I'm always at home. We carry stories in our bodies, poems through our veins, electrifying our bones with memories that remind us of our ancestors' dreams. This is the collective order of our collaborative existence. We are in relation with all that is, and our strongest tool of creation and balance is love. And love is a delicious recipe packed with life force nutrients that are guaranteed to nourish the soul, please the soil, and fulfill our responsibility to our young. That is to honor, protect, inspire, and serve.
It's absolutely beautiful. Thank you. Where can people hear you perform your work?
At Artsite Gallery, which is located at 109 University Avenue West inside the Capitol Building Complex, I host a community connector from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock, which invites people to drum, to share poems, and to share their stories.
Thank you for sharing it with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Well, unfortunately, that's all for this episode of Scribes and Songsters. Many thanks to our guests, author Marianne Adam and Windsor's multicultural storyteller, TJ Travis. Thanks to our Scribes and Songsters team, producer Liz Pettypeats-Phillips, technical producer and editor Gary Glass, social media manager Michelle Fortier, and consultant Brand Sweet. Grateful thanks to Tony Toldo and the Toldo Foundation, and to Neil and Tina Queering for their support. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you soon, right back here on Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel.